Welcome, everyone, to the 2021 Virtual Summer School Series, Moving Extension Forward, Lessons and Strategies from the Pandemic. We're excited to have you all here to join us and wrap up our series today. Today, we had the most people registered, over 200 of you registered for today's session, so there was a lot of interest in this great panel that we have. I'm Diane Mashburn, Extension Instructor with the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture. Our virtual summer school series is co-hosted annually by the Southern Region Program Leaders Network Program and Staff Development Committee and the National Association of Extension Program and Staff Development Professionals. I want to thank everybody who's contributed to planning this important and timely series, both this week and in weeks prior. Today's session is where does Extension go from here? And we're going to be having a panel discussion today with Dr. Jorge Atiles, Dr. Doug Steele, and Dr. Chris Watkins. We also have two great co-facilitators assisting us with Q&A today. We have Adiola Gwande from West Virginia University Extension and Cheryl Newberry from Oklahoma State University. So to introduce our panel today, we first have Dr. Jorge Atiles. Dr. Atiles is the Dean of Extension and Engagement, as well as the Director of West Virginia University Extension Service. Next is Dr. Doug Steele. Dr. Steele is the Vice President of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resources of APLU, the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities. And then we have Dr. Chris Watkins. Dr. Watkins is the Director of Cornell Cooperative Extension, an Associate Dean in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences and the College of Human Ecology. He's also the current chair of ECOP, the Extension Committee on Organization and Policy. So I want to welcome all of you here today. Thank you for agreeing to be on this great panel. We're excited to hear from each one of you today. So we're gonna just not take any more time. We wanna just dive into our questions that we have today. We have a few questions to start our panel off with, and then we'll turn to any of those questions you put into the Q&A box and get to as many of those as we can. So our first question, I'm gonna start things off with Dr. Atiles. We're gonna start off with, what successes have you seen Extension have during the pandemic? I kind of want to start with a kind of a state perspective and we can move up to national. So Dr. Atiles.
Well, thank you very much and good afternoon, everybody. Before I answer your question, I would like to actually thank you all for the invitation and also to really thank all of the members of this very distinguished group. Without you, we cannot do Extension. Without the training, the program development, and all of those pieces that keep us on top of what we need to do, we could not do our jobs. So thank you. You know, one of the things that I believe are successes that happened because we had to work during the pandemic is realizing again that we are first responders. We really are. We are, in a way, educational first responders, and we are ready to actually already be deployed to be able to assist during the very hard times that we face as a nation. We were successful with 4-H, for example. You know, how many virtual camps were we able to successfully maintain and do during this time? I know in my state, we have something called Camp in a Bag. You know, parents will come to the lines and grab, you know, the packets and the kits, and we send those home with them, and we were able to follow up and be able to keep the kids engaged and learning during a time of uncertainty and frankly, where people were very scary. In agriculture and natural resources, you know, we were able to even amp up our efforts in working with farmers markets to be able to get those farmers and producers to get their products to market and be able to have people get it in a safe way. And again, the health role that we play was a success. I think there were things that we were able to gain, as very much is evidenced by the EXCITE partnership that we have with the CDC and the Extension Foundation that has led to funding for many of our states for vaccination education. But I think it actually called attention to the role that we can continue to play and enhance towards all aspects of health that are related to our disciplines. So I think those are very good successes for us to be very proud of. And I want to also congratulate every state for what they have done. I think the United States is better poised to face this pandemic because it can count on an extension service too. When you think about it, we are already there. We are ready. Well, the only thing that we had to do during this pandemic was moving goods because we were already there. We are actually even better than the military. The military had to mobilize its troops to get to places where we are there, and we will continue to be there. We might look a little different. We have now realized that we can actually work from home. It might not be ideal in many cases, but we might work from home when we need to, that we can work virtually when we need to, and also realize that that face-to-face human touch is critical for our success. And that was evidenced during this pandemic. Thank you, Diane.
Either of our other panelists like to add to that about successes they've seen this last year?
So if I can jump in, Diane, and I think Jorge did a great job of covering some of the major items. I thought it's interesting to sort of remember, though, that this has been an incredibly unique time in history with the pandemic, but also coincided with the murder of George Floyd, and an awakening of the need for systemic change in our system in terms of addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, you know, that's been a confounding factor over this time. And I sort of, in terms of the New York system, and I know, and Jorge sort of, when he talked about the, you know, every state has stepped up, that is so true. But every state, of course, has a different model. In New York, we have a very decentralized system where we have all our counties have separate organizations. They are not Cornell employees, and Cornell University has oversight, a very different structure. So we took a different approach, and so I'm going to divide up our responses into three, and I'll try to do this very briefly because I think we want to spend most time answering questions at the end. So one of the first things we did was sort of mapping out our approaches. So in March of 2020, which seems like a lifetime ago now, we were looking at situational awareness, looking at our emergency response systems, and then we built through a monthly series of approaches, which ended up in August and September as focusing on response and recovery. The interesting thing with our very decentralized system was the pandemic, I think, brought our system together through a number of initiatives. And so we instituted virtual weekly meetings with every director in the state. We had frequent meetings with the staff and another set with board presidents. And the issues vary, but focused on sharing successes and concerns, discovering how educators and staff felt emotionally, as well as to do with work-related issues. And this really helped us explore what we could do directly and indirectly. And frankly, it highlighted the scale from empowerment to despair and stress. I'm almost embarrassed to say, in a way, it was challenging and exhilarating for somebody at the director level, because you know you're sort of at the position where you are, you hope you're making differences, but it felt very, very different for those staff who were very uncertain about what their future employment would be. So it was a really a time that I think our success was recognizing that our staff, our educators, you call them agents in many other states, are the most important part of our system. And Jorge has already acknowledged you. Secondly, is that role as essential workers in education, especially in ag and food systems, where our educators never stopped working. And as a result of that, we built incredibly strong, or we built on our strong relationships with organizations like New York Ag and Markets. We were involved in delivery of face coverings and sanitizers. Work with the university, we were enhancing the delivery of food safety information. It was much more challenging in the area of high touch areas of nutrition education, FNET, for example, in New York City, very, very hard to reach some of those audiences. 4-H, again, Jorge talked, the success there. Those were also those challenges in many of the counties in New York. And then finally, since I touched on diversity, equity, and inclusion, we've made substantial investments during the pandemic in addressing the issues of how do we increase the challenges of ensuring that our population that works within the extension system reflects the audiences that we are addressing. Thank you so much.
Okay, so we have, I love hearing all those successes. I work with our county folks and talking about impacts, and that's always the greatest thing to hear is those successes that have come out of this pandemic. So everything that both of you mentioned, I completely agree with. So one of the next questions that we have is, what changes did you see that were implemented during the pandemic that you can see as being critical for us to continue into the future? Why don't we, Dr. Watkins, I'm going to turn things over to you again.
I'm sorry you have to listen to me again so quickly. I was hoping you have the opportunity for Doug to act as a buffer between me and me, but you're stuck with me twice in a row. But, Jorge already mentioned working from home, adapting to existing and new modes of program delivery has been really exciting. And of course, Zoom and other virtual tools have become part of our daily experiences, even if it's loathed at times. And there are days when I've started at 8 a.m. and I'm on Zoom at 8 p.m. and I can't tell you how much I loathe Zoom, even though I recognize what an incredible tool it is. And just think what it was like in 1918 at the time of the last pandemic. How did our systems operate? I mean, it truly is a remarkable thing. I'd love to know more about that. But I think some of the changes that were implemented includes our farmers and how they have altered what their expectations are. So many of the farmers that I deal with, because I also work on apple fruit as part of my research part of being extension director. The apple industry, our farmers were very reluctant to go virtual. Now they're very reluctant to go back because what they've realized is they don't have to get in their trucks and drive for 2 hours, listen to a meeting, and then drive back. They can stay, they don't have to travel, don't have to leave the staff on the farm. And, it's just an amazing thing. Last night I was on a Zoom with, it was a research and farmer meeting involving Washington State, Michigan, and New York. It was a 2-hour session, talking about Honeycrisp apples. In case you haven't tried a Honeycrisp apple, you should try it. It's one of the most wonderful apples out there to eat. But that was a remarkable thing, right? There's no travel involved. It was interactive. The farmers were asked, again, if it's set up well, we're interacting with the audiences, you get this incredible input. And of course, that comes down to, as Diane is demonstrating, comes down to the moderator and how well he or she does in terms of ensuring that you make these things work. So it's not just the technology, it's using the technology as well. The downsides, the lack of social interaction. And I've already mentioned the difficulty with nutrition programming. But again, I think that's we have instituted the start of those changes. But the last thing I will say about the changes that were implemented were what we have seen is the massively increased participation in professional development opportunities. With no travel costs, our 4-H educators, we've never had the type of attendance that we've had before. We at Cornell also have what's called a November Agriculture and Service. And the way it's set up now is you're not running from room to room. You were set up with hour sessions and you can pick and choose from the menu. So again, I'll stop, but just say, I think it just highlights that these changes did start, but as I think we will address in the next question, they are going to continue into the future. Thank you.
I would love to add to that. However, Doug hasn't had a chance to say anything. So why don't we open the floor for Doug to add to the two questions already out there.
Well, let me start by saying it's a pleasure to join you this afternoon. And if you know anything about me or my past or heard me speak, you know I'm a very enthusiastic supporter of our professional associations, the work that you do, the leadership you bring. And I agree with previous comments. You were on the front line through most of this transition, the pandemic. And I hope when you have a chance to catch your breath, you really talk about best practices that we learned that we can incorporate in the future moving forward. It's going to be very critical. In September of this year, I'll start my 40th year. My first 38 years were in 4 different institutions of higher education, land-grant universities, and my last 2.5 years here at the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, which is your national association. And I've seen a lot over those 40 years. I remember when we had a county newsletter go out, we had to put it in a drum turner and put dry ink in there and just start cranking away till you got the number of copies you needed. I remember selectric typewriters where you did not get a do-over or correct. You had to redo a whole page if you made a major mistake. I remember in 1985, my first laptop computer that was the size of my desk when it arrived from College Station, Texas. I remember my first mobile phone, the bricks that we used to always carry around, and wondered this was the greatest technology ever because we can communicate. I remember my first data-driven phone and what that meant. And in all of these innovations and technology, I really think that we could never plan for or imagine what a pandemic would look like across the world, the impact it would have in our country, and the impact it has on the kind of work that we do. Early in my career, I did a lot of leadership trainings. I love the story of Alice in Wonderland when Alice first fell down the rabbit hole, was disoriented, didn't know what she was going to do, started walking down the road and came upon some road signs, and the Cheshire cat was sitting on top of the signs. And she asked the cat, "Which road should I take?" And the cat's response was, "Where do you want to go?" And she said, "I don't really know." And the cat said, "Either road will take you there." I think 18 months ago, we had no idea where we wanted to go. We had no idea the impact, and we had no idea of the changes we'd experienced. And very much like Chris and Jorge, as an extension person, so much of our job is people and relationships and getting together. And we didn't have that opportunity anymore. So how do you continue to show value, and how do you continue to show the investment of our county, state, and federal funds in the work that we do? And what I learned through the pandemic and our ability to operate differently, but also create a new expectation from our clientele moving forward is, one, I think people expect a hybrid model going forward. They're going to want opportunities to participate on Zoom. I think in some ways we have spoiled our clientele because they like 24/7 access now. And we're going to have to be more intentional and deliberate about how we record programs and make them available. I heard stories on Master Gardener training that a typical training, you might have, 100 people show up, and all of a sudden 3,000 people were signing up online to learn about how to grow and can and process your own foods. So there's some very unique opportunities, but for me, at the end of the day, it's not lose the personal touch that Extension can bring that really separates us from everybody else that's out there. And so I think as we move forward, we have got to understand not just the challenges of coming out of the pandemic, but the opportunities that's presented. And the one that really sticks in the back of my mind is we have totally changed from "can you hear me now" to "your mute button is on." And it's a different day and time for all of us. And it's exciting for me. I've always found extension work to be exciting because every day we can wake up and make a difference. And that's what's important.
Yeah. I like to underscore what Doug was just said. I mean, it is so amazing to see how our reach changed. We had programs that were done in agriculture that were done by our master gardeners or our horticulture programs. And we had suddenly people joining our virtual sessions from abroad, from other countries. I mean, who would have thought? With 4-H, we reach kids that typically never felt comfortable coming to a group setting or didn't have the access to physically come to some events. And we were able to capture a new group of kids that we had not touched before with our programs. But one thing that is a significant change is how the national political scope has really divided this nation. And we have always been the unbiased, neutral, scientifically based entity in every single community. And this group that is attending this session today, I think you have a hard challenge ahead of you, because we need you to help us navigate a divided nation, so we can continue to be a trusted entity that, regardless of where the truth is now, where is the truth anymore? There's so much misinformation out there. So how do we ensure that people remain trusting our information, so they know that we always have their best interests at heart, that we are the people's university, that we have that mandate to help people help themselves achieve their goals for a better quality of life, for a better community, and an economy that supports us all.
Elaine, that goes right into what we're talking about. All of you have alluded to some of these emerging opportunities, continued opportunities that we've seen develop over the pandemic and even leading into the pandemic. But let's go even further. What opportunities do you see Extension having going forward as we hopefully very soon get past this pandemic? So I see Dr. Watkins, you're unmuted. Would you like to start us off?
Sure. I had to smile with Doug talking about technologies of the past. And there are people on this call that probably don't know what the heck you're talking about, Doug. No, I'm not all that, of course I'm much younger than I look. So I don't remember those brick telephones at all. But if I did, I would think how amazingly absurd they are in the modern context. But I think this is the fascinating thing, that I don't know that any of us know what it's going to be like 10 years from now. And I think we have only just scratched the surface of the technologies. So I have somebody in my office that's playing around with virtual reality. And part of me says, what the heck is that? The other part is saying, how can I use that in my own work, right? And language translation. Google is doing work on language translation that will revolutionize talking to different audiences that we address. So, I think the opportunities are incredible, but I think we have to, as educators and specialists and faculty, be willing to adapt and grow into these opportunities. And, we often talk about how we like change. Well, no one actually likes change. Even the people that say they like change don't like change. So I think, but we have to be hiring the people that are willing to make change. I'd also say, as a final comment in terms of the opportunities going forward, is we have to remember that not one size fits all. So yes, the future is technology, but it is still just one of the tools. So fundamentally, as human beings, I believe we're hardwired for person-to-person interaction and learning from observing and from demonstration. So when I talk to millennials and Generation Z, that we often think of as accessing their information, more through the cell phone than maybe other mechanisms, I see those groups, they still want to get together. They still want to be sharing experiences in concert with each other. So, I think we just have to realize that it is truly hybrid, but there's many degrees of hybridization. I'm sure that's not a proper way of using that word. But, there are different set of groups that we will always have to have that personal interaction with. And there are other groups that are going to be just fine, never seeing another person other than through the video screen. And our challenge is going to be addressing the needs of all of those types of individuals.
I think there are some opportunities and challenges ahead of us. that we really need to address. And there is one question by Sarah Bowman and about what are we gonna do to keep new hires on board, right? That's on the chat box, and I'm gonna take a stab because this is part of that challenge and that opportunity for the future. We have a fairly young generation of extension workers and employees that have a different kind of interest from, you know, some of us baby boomers and others. And how do we appeal to them? How do we keep them engaged? How do we also, and that goes to the previous question by Nathan, take care of things that they care about? You know, he was talking about climate change. When are we going to finally, as an extension service, do something about it? And I typed that answer there. I think probably Doug will be better suited to answer that. But, you know, how are we going to keep new hires on board? How are we going to work on that life work balance that is being discussed? Well, this pandemic has shown us that we can find some of that balance if we are now willing to bend our all-time rules about, no, you gotta be in the office, you know, physically from this time to this time, and also work on weekends and also work nights. Well, we now really have an opportunity to go back and say, well, see what happened. It didn't disappear, extension didn't disappear. And at the same time, we have another opportunity to now re-educate our partners. And Chris, you talk about how you guys are structured in New York, right? Here in West Virginia, our partners, by statute, they can actually tell us, no, we don't want you to keep this agent hired in this county, even a tenure agent. So we now have an opportunity to educate and get educated with our local partners as to what extension needs to be for the future. Many times our county offices are in courthouses and all that, and if they don't see us there, they complain. But my question is always being, well, if they're there, they're not doing their job. So we're gonna have to work really hard. It is an opportunity, but also a challenge as to how do we change the perception of the workforce in extension, and how do we measure outcomes and outputs in a way that is sustainable, that is well rewarded, that is valued, that is effective, and that I keep people engaged.
So true. And I think the other element that you kind of touched on there is these young educators are coming in, they're not looking at this as a lifetime career. You know, they're looking for it as a challenge, and when that challenge dissipates, they want to do something else. As a different way of thinking than I think we've thought of traditionally in the past.
And in some ways, that may also tie into Karen's question in the chat about, you know, where are we going? What's the direction? What's the opportunity? Where's the new audiences? And I, you know, I've always believed throughout my extension career, extension has done best when they acknowledge and find a gap and then step in to fill that gap. So what do we have in the way of a gap when you come out of pandemic? You have a gap of, is the information you find through social media, is it science-based? Is it appropriate? Has it been vetted? Has it been critiqued? We have a gap in people that want to have good at-home learning environments for their kids. Is it a tested curriculum that has been developed by professionals? As Jorge said earlier, we had gaps with producers on getting their produce to the market in a safe and secure way where people have confidence in that. I think we're going to have gaps in the ability to address issues such as posted climate change and the role of our agriculture producers in climate change. And so I would really encourage this association to think about what is that next wave of information that's going to be needed, and who better to provide that than a trusted source that's been here for 114 years. And I like to say the principles of extension have not changed over the course of our 100-year history. It's the methods that we use to translate that information into practical application and adoption. And in my world, extension has always been about subject matter combined with our people skills. And now we can add a third bullet of technology, which is going to drive a lot of what we do. but we will have the ability to reach greater audience, lower cost efficiency around the world than we've ever seen before if we do it rightly and spend enough time doing that. And now I'm going to go ahead and jump on just very quickly on the climate question. I personally believe we're two years behind where we should have been on climate. When I say we, I say land-grant universities, research, extension, and academic programs. If you look at this last administration, prior to the election, almost every speech given had a climate or climate change topic to it. And Secretary Vilsack has been very clear. That's one of the #1 priorities for USDA. And if you look at the recently passed House Ag Appropriations budget, there's money for climate throughout that budget. And so right now our goal is to get all that information in one place. We're actually going to convene a climate working group to talk about the role of extension and research in addressing climate change, or if you live in a state that is not supportive of climate change, climate resiliency, because it's very hard to argue the fact that there have been changes in weather patterns over recent years that are impacting all of our ag producers, our farmers, our ranchers, our foresters. And so it's not arguing the source of the change or the science behind it, it's the reality that we experience every day. So you'll be seeing more coming down very quickly about climate change. And my biggest message is a lot of what they're doing in climate is regulatory or policy driven. And what they need is good basic research, and they need good applied extension work to show the proven methods of how do you sequester carbon? What is the value of cover crops? What's it mean to have regenerative agriculture? What's it mean to be able to monitor your soil health? There are so many things that research already has been conducted, but extension has not taken that to the end user yet. And once again, that's the gap that we got to step in. And my message here in DC is we need the funding to make that happen. We can't no longer do it with less people, no longer do it at the expense and sacrifice of something else. We need the funding, the partnerships, the capacity for extension to go out and do what they do best, and that's translational research.
You know, Doug and Diane, we're never gonna let you talk again. But anyway, so in my response to add to what Doug just said, I do believe that we do need to be part of the conversation, not as an afterthought. Extension should have been brought to the table earlier on, and as Doug alluded to, we are a little bit late already in it, but we need to be in the front end because we end up having to deal with the back end, having to help our producers deal with the effects of climate change. And as Doug has alluded, climate is changing, whether you believe that is permanent change or is temporary change, it's changing, and we need to deal with it because we need to produce food to feed the world. We need to produce textile to clothe the world. We need to generate energy. We need that for so many things. But the one piece that I wanted to add to what Doug just said is that extension is critical for also helping people adopt behavioral practices, even outside of agriculture, in our daily lives, to be able to reduce that carbon footprint that we as human beings are very responsible for. And that's something that we can do something about. And I think extension is critical, it's extremely critical to that.
I was going to be completely fine with you guys taking over. So one of our questions that I'm going to pose to our panelists, they've kind of started answering, but having to do with skills. And I will say right now, you can witness right now, our extension leaders have very much learned how to monitor their own questions. They have been stealing my moderator job. Which is fine. That this is actually going to allow us to get to more of your questions since we have been able to integrate them into our conversation today. So I do want to just one last question that we had discussed beforehand, and you guys have already been touching on this all through your conversation, but what other skills do you see as being valuable for our extension professionals to have to be successful going forward? We asked our folks if you're confident in the skills of today's extension professional to help lead us going forward. And we did have 19% that say they were completely confident in the skill sets that we have currently, but we had others that are not so confident in that. I know we have room for improvement here in Arkansas, as I know in talking with others across other states, there's always room for improvement. So where do you see that improvement? What skills do you think we really need to concentrate on with our employees?
You know, I think it has become extremely evident that we need to change our tactics in working with our elected officials that actually are the ones that provide nowadays the majority of the funding for us to work as an extension service. You know, the federal money has remained stagnant. It's the same. Well, and that's the good news, I guess. At least it's about the same. On the other side, we are losing some state dollars, we are losing some county dollars, but I don't think the new generation of legislators get what extension now is and what it can be. And because of the political divide too, and that universities are under attack because a majority, you know, legislators think that we are just generating a bunch of liberals that are going out there and just messing up the world. Higher education is under attack. It really is. And because we are tied to higher education, we get some of that. But we need to figure out how we're going to be able to work with our local governments too. I hear in our own region, Chris, some local governments are pulling out of, you know, the funding formula, are giving us less money. I had 2 cases in which they took, you know, they kicked us out of the county offices. They might not see us as a mandate. They're now dealing with more pressing needs, like, you know, the prisons and the policing and all of those other expenses. We need to figure out how we're going to begin to treat legislators, our state government and our local governments and boards of education as our clients as well. What do we bring to the table to help them deal with the pressures that they have? How can we help them reduce, I don't know, the burden on crime, right? How can we reduce through best practices, recycling, and many things, you know, the burden of the landfill management, water, septic, many other things. But we don't typically talk that language, and we don't yet position ourselves in front of them as to, you know, we are an investment. We always have used 4-H as the hook. In the past, it was most, you know, agriculture. Now it's 4-H the hook. I mean, the children. We're going to need more hooks than that. And we're going to have to really be able to demonstrate that we are an investment. So to me, we need to figure out how to better talk to our legislators, how to better relate to their needs, in addition to the needs of the people that we typically have served, for their needs. And what do we have to bring to the table to meet those? And I think that's going to be a great key for us to not only recuperate funding and support an opportunity, but actually grow it.
Just to add to Jorge's point, and it's interesting, I was attending a staff meeting in Suffolk, and that would have been a 7-hour drive. I did it by Zoom. And the challenge that I gave to the staff and educators there was, what is your elevator pitch? If somebody comes in and you meet them in the street or you're out socializing, they say, what do you do? How do you describe what you do in a way that is meaningful, that is not going to make their eyes glaze over and want to walk away from the conversation? And I would put the challenge out to everybody on this call. What is your elevator speech? What is your how do you tell the story of what an incredible organization we have across the US? And how do we have every citizen that we meet brought on to realize the relevance and importance of our extension system?
There is a question that relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yes, that was on my next on the agenda.
Have you not noticed that Diane says, I would like to answer this question live, which means we've got to stop taking over from her.
No,
Yeah.
it's completely fine. But I bet you we're looking at the same question, because I definitely would love to pose. We had a comment related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and then we had a question related to what discussions are taking place at the state and federal level around integrating diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts into the plans for diversifying our workforce to better represent the clients we are dedicated to serving in a global environment. And then we also had comments related to hiring professionals based on degrees earned, and not just based on degrees earned, but with life experiences. And I know as you guys are keeping an eye out on this, I just want to get your take on all of these comments related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and hiring and promotion and all this. So sounds like Dr. Atiles, you wanted to.
Yeah. And Chris rightly so began, mentioned that at the beginning of this session. I was dealing with this yesterday, actually the day before yesterday. I went to accounting, and one of our commissioner partners was concerned and actually had taken some funding away from us because he was concerned with what the university was doing by creating an Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and something else, and how that's creating more division rather than bringing people together. And then went immediately into this, race, critical theory, and all that kind of stuff. And everything now is so confusing that the efforts that we have had towards diversity, equity, and inclusion are now going to be wrapped into a political, I don't know what to call it, but let's say a political agenda. So we're going to soon be facing also opposition from people in our efforts to do diversity, equity, and inclusion, because it's going to be looked upon as you are just being anti-white and you're putting the white people down and you're trying to rewrite history and you're trying to tell us that we are bad people. So that is just a reality that I don't know how we're going to be able to equate that with what we are trying to do. And since in this country, we love to give people and things labels, it doesn't help. We do need to continue to diversify our workforce. We need to look like the people we serve. They need to be able to see us and feel like, somebody there has my back. Somebody there, I have some trust in that person. And that the effort to be able to get a diversity of, and I'm not talking only about race and physical look, but also it's diversity of thought, disabilities, and many other things that come into play. Going to your question on how would that be valued in terms of promotion and tenure, we have to write it in. It's time for us to, after this pandemic, to go back and look at what should an annual plan of work look like, and what should a job description when we are trying to hire somebody should look like, and what is our promotion, and in my case, in our state, our agents also have tenure. What should that look like for us to be able to reward what we really value?
Dr. Steele, do you have?
Yes, ma'am. If you listen to the current administration, they've obviously, through all federal programs and specifically USDA, are trying to put a very concentrated effort on DEI, what it looks like, and a lot of the I think weaknesses that we had in the past. And to be honest, to move forward, we got to be more intentional about it. It's how we develop partnerships and how we recruit students to go to our colleges and learn the different majors that we have available. It's how we create local ownership to what we do. I remember when I started in 1981 in Amarillo, Texas, we had a little thing called the ES-237, which was the 4-H reporting system. And we actually had to sit down with the map of the county and use colored pencils and color in every area of the county that we had clubs. What was the makeup of that club? What was the diversity in that community? And it did a couple of things. One, it showed us that there's areas we just weren't reaching out well. And if we're honest with ourselves, a lot of young people and even producers in minority populations have never come to our programs because I don't think they felt welcome and they didn't feel valued. And so the one thing I learned in Amarillo, if we were going to have inroads into minority youth populations, you had to look at the structure and talk to the churches, sometimes talk to grandma, had to talk to the boys and girls clubs and find opportunities where the youth were already there. You know, a very wise person told me, if you want to grow the 4-H program, go where the youth are, and that's where the youth are. But then you also have to offer things that they have an interest in it. And I think the unique thing about 4-H is we have kids that are interested in junior master gardening. We have kids that are interested in how can I be proactively involved in climate, maybe be a climate ambassador. We have kids that want to involved in health. And so it's really our responsibility to make the changes necessary where people see that not only are they wanted, that their voice is going to be heard and respected. If you look on the ag side, of course, we've got in many states our 1890 counterparts that already have strong connections with minority ag producers, but it's still, how do we collaborate and cooperate together that makes us all be more successful? And I think moving forward, a lot of the programs that fund what we do through the National Institute of Food and Agriculture and through SDA is going to have a question, what is our plan for diversity, equity, inclusion? And it can't be something that we just happen upon and it works. It's got to be very intentional. It's got to be new partnerships and collaborations. And it's got to be an area where people feel like they are wanted, they belong, and they have ownership in what we're doing.
There's so much more than just a checkbox at the end of the year. And I remember myself doing those maps. Dr. Steele, I did that coloring map of Ashley County, Arkansas, whenever I first started as a 4-H agent. So that's something that exercise I remember doing and looking at our communities. So we have another question I think we really would love to hear from all of you about is somebody's talking about multi-state collaborations. What suggestions do you have to encourage those collaborations across state lines in our extension work? I know some states are really good at doing that, or some program areas are really good at doing that, but there's a lot of room for improvement. So what suggestions do you all have for that? So I'm going to throw that to Dr. Watkins because he just stays unmuted. So I'll just send that to him.
Thank you so much for that. I love that question. Well, Jorge and I are in the same region. So I am going to look to Doug to give us more of a national perspective, put him on the spot. But it definitely is a challenge. I look within New York, the only formal collaboration that we have is with Penn State in one regional team. Because actually some of the difficulties are not Jorge and I sitting down over coffee and deciding that we could share. Geographically, that's not going to work, but hypothetically speaking, is when our university masters get into the job of allocating funding and how that funding transfer works, I cannot tell you how unbelievably complicated that becomes. So that is a challenge, but I would say I'm going to speak for the Northeast and get Jorge to add on further. As extension directors in the Northeast, we are very deliberately looking at how we can pool money, not necessarily to share resources over state lines, but putting seed money into encouraging collaborations. So that's the first step. But I think there are some wonderful funding opportunities that I think are going to come down the line, especially in urban ag would be one example. And I think the opportunity for us to work as a collective to address collectively some of those big issues are high. So I guess I'll stop babbling by saying that it's harder to make it work with state dollars. But I think what we have to do is position ourselves to work together to access competitive federal dollars to make some of these partnerships work. Jorge, what's your feeling?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I cannot agree anymore. Right now, all of our states, we have some deficits in terms of our expertise. Our traditional program areas, we have voids. In West Virginia, have tremendous void in what you will believe, FCS, you know, which I spent most of my career in FCS, and it hurts me. But without enough resources, I am having to come to my neighbors and say, okay, what do you have? So actually the Northeast region, I'm leading a charge of bringing the few FCS specialists and program leaders from the area to talk about what are voids, how can we work together to try to fill those voids, and then have those signature programs that we can implement throughout and support each other. That's just one thing, but without assuming that this is just so easy, because Creed did talk about the difficulties of actually working across state lines in many different ways. Every state has a different way to operate extension too. But I think we have a great opportunity to also try to convince the rest of the university to be part of extension. And I am hoping that I'm able to get other colleges in the university to have people who have that kind of passion and that kind of talent to be assigned part of their FTEs to work with us. We are open to work with anybody. I'll come up with the money for the travel, for the program expenses and stuff like that. I might not have enough money to pay for time and effort. But I'm gonna try to work on that, because I think that's gonna be part of the future, to really diversify also what we do through extension, because we cannot pretend that 4 program areas have the solutions to everything that the state needs. So how do we supplement what we already have and bring other people on board in a time where all of our federal agencies are also looking at multi and transdisciplinary work for us to be able to deliver what is needed for the state?
Dr. Steele, do you have any thoughts on that from the national level about collaboration?
Oh, I probably have about 40 years of frustration I could share with you. A lot of it has to do with funding restrictions on, can you work across state lines? A lot of it is the ownership of county commissioner budgets, thinking if our county agent's not working in our county, it's not a benefit to our clientele. A lot of it is states not looking forward. And I kind of faced the same situation that Jorge did when I was at Montana State, is that we couldn't afford the kind of support we needed for our smaller ag producers. And so we contracted to Iowa support with swine, and we contracted to Utah State for support with dairy, and I contracted to North Dakota State for a small crop specialist. And we don't challenge ourselves to try to operate that way and think differently. And it's hard. I mean, partnerships are messy. Splitting funding is messy. The best successful national program we have is research has multi-state research grants that have to include more than one partner. And when your funding says that, you operate differently. If you've grown up in extension and know about extension administration, when we turned in our plan of work, back in the old days, we were supposed to report exactly how much of our resources on an annual basis went to multi-state programming. And the goal was 25%. Most states I was in, we reported at less than 5% because it's difficult to report who took the lead for that and who should get the credit for that. And we have an antiquated system that unfortunately will not promote across state and regional lines. And how do you do that? You change the funding source, you change the expectations, and you add incentives. And let's be honest. I'm a late career kind of guy, and what time I have left, I want to make sure that we can do things through our national system that we've never thought about before. And I think we have I think the pandemic has created an opportunity. I think it's unfortunate in DC that we have a very restricted partisan approach to everything we're doing. We have new leadership coming in agriculture, and the challenges remain. But my concern is, unless we have a focused plan on how we're going to move this forward, it's not going to happen. And I think part of my job is to create the ability and the structure for us to have these meaningful conversations.
Thank you so much.
I think, Diane, there's something that we have not mentioned yet, because we probably have talked about that in the past. We might already be taking it for granted. But our future will also need to depend on how we're gonna be able to prove that we are making a difference. So you guys have a lot of people in your team who are program evaluators, who are, an evaluation specialist, and I am so excited. That was my first hire when I got here. I hired Adiola Ogunade right there. And, we need more, evidence that our programs do work, that we make a difference, and also evidence that will point towards the things that we're not doing so well, so we can fix them, so we can improve, so we can do what our job is, which is to provide positive change. We have challenges, but if we can think of a way on touching every single American in this nation through extension, by whatever means, some we may touch through online presence, some face-to-face, some through correspondence or printed materials, but making it a goal that the extension of this nation is truly gonna be in every single household in this nation, that will be just phenomenal. It will be a dream come true.
I think we could not have ended on a better note for this panel, for sure. I definitely agree with everything there. We do have some questions that went unanswered. We are going to pull all these together and get some responses from our panelists. I know they're very busy, but we'll try to get some information from them and be able to put this up with our recording. So I want to thank our panelists so much. This was an excellent conversation to have. I know we touched on so many different things. And I for one, just got so many different ideas and things out of the comments each one of you said today. I want to thank every one of you that attended, not only today, but the rest of our series. We want to, if you would like to contact any of our panelists today, we do have their contact information that we'll be sharing in just a little bit. We will be posting today's recording and the Q&A up on the NAEPSDP webinar archive page, which has been already shared into chat. And as the note says, we have Monday and Tuesday ready to go. So if you want to go up and read or rewatch those sessions, or maybe you missed it and you want to watch them, they are there for you. We'd also appreciate your feedback, not only on today's session, but any of the previous sessions in our series. To access this survey, you can either follow the link in the chat, or you can scan the QR code in our closing slides with your phone. So have that out and ready if you're going to use that QR code. Thank you again to all three of our great panelists today, all of our series speakers, our facilitators, and to everybody in attendance. We hope you have a wonderful day, wonderful weekend, and thank you for attending the 2021 Virtual Summer School Series.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you so much.
This was fun. Until next time.